Hey VC, it's Matt, and so continuing in my series of Beach Boy album reviews, chronologically speaking, and this, for better or worse, I think is where it's going to get interesting for me because, as I've said before, I started this series with the idea that I'm familiar with the 60s hits, as everybody is, but I wanted to find out, didn't know the albums that well, wanted to find out if the albums are worthwhile, if there's some hidden gems on the albums that don't get played on the radio all the time. And I found out that that is indeed the case with their early 60s albums. Now we're up to 1967, and from here on out, they didn't have a whole lot of hits. They had some minor hits with the next few albums, and then kind of sort of no hits until the Kokomo song, the god awful Kokomo song in the late 80s. But so these are albums that I've seen in the record stores, but never heard and not familiar with at all. Whereas the earlier '60s albums, I was, you know, unfamiliar with them by and large, but at least I knew the hits. So, and this is also the funny thing is there's a lot of people, seems to be a lot of people in England especially that Beach Boys fans that this is kind of their favorite period. This kind of Smile or Pet Sounds or Smile era up to about 1973 or so, which is, of course, during that time they really weren't doing anything commercially in America, and they were pretty much just a history, a forgotten band by and large. But for whatever reason, people in England continued to pay attention to them a little bit more than we did over here. So, anyway, this is going to be fun on these next few albums. Maybe they'll be good, maybe they won't. We will see. So this is of course Wild Honey. This was released on December 18th, 1967, which is just 3 months after their previous album, Smiley Smile, came out, which also came out on which came out, I'm sorry, on September 18th, 1967. Did a little bit better chart-wise. Smiley Smile, I think, only got to number 41 in the U.S., which was their lowest charting album at that time. This got all the way up to number 24 in the U.S. Not great, but a little bit better. Got to number 7 in the UK, so a little bit better there. Um, this album, I bought this because I've been buying these albums as I go along to do the reviews as I work through the band's discography here. And I bought this album, I don't know, a couple of months ago or so. Funny thing is, I've got a good memory of this album because I'd never heard, as far as I know, I'd never heard the album before. Just recently, I played it the last 2 or 3 weeks to get familiar with it. But my brother, my older brother, when I was a kid, had this. I guess he got it when it came out, '67, and I'm sure he played it. I don't remember hearing it because I would have been about 4 years old at December of '67. I would have been just turned four, actually, a couple of months earlier, so 3 months earlier. But I remember the album cover, thinking it was pretty cool when I was a little kid. And my brother and my cousin, who lived around the corner, uh, she and him got into a little kick for a while of painting, just canvas and oil painting. That I remember. I'm not sure how long that lasted, but I remember that she painted a picture of this cover, and guess left it at our house for whatever reason. But I remember that being around when I was a little kid, and I had a copy of this album forever. That was actually probably the one my brother bought way back when, and I still have it, but it, for whatever reason, the record went missing, and I never, when I got it, I just, because I thought the cover was cool, so I just stuck it in my record collection, even though it doesn't have the record in it. But so I finally went out and bought this, and like I said, with the exception of one song, "Darling," which was a hit of sorts, which everyone heard, that still shows up on oldies radio. I had never heard any of the rest of these songs, as far as I know, unless I heard them when I was really little and don't remember. But funny how life works. About 2, 3 weeks ago, I'm driving around in the car going somewhere, listening to Little Steven's Underground Garage on XM radio, and DJ says, here's a Beach Boys song. Song starts playing, and I'm like, don't know this one. What is this? Kind of unfamiliar, and it pretty quick becomes apparent that it's the title track, Wild Honey, which, I mean, like I said, unless I heard it, because it was released as a single in 1967, so maybe it got some radio play when I was 4 or something. I don't remember ever hearing it since then. But so yeah, that was on the radio, and then the darndest thing, a week or so later, I'm listening to 60s on 6, and Wild Honey shows up again. So, song that I never heard in my life, as far as I know, I get to hear twice in 2 weeks on the radio. Anyway, so I've been playing this album quite a bit because when I did my Kinks reviews, I kind of made the mistake of the 60s albums I was well familiar with and have had for years and know inside and out. The 70s albums, not so much, and I went out and bought those and listened to them a few times so that I didn't want to just give them like 1 or 2 listens. But, so, and I went and reviewed them, and some of those now I kind of regret because I look back on those reviews, and some of the 70s albums that I gave kind of bad reviews to since then, because I did those reviews, probably a couple of years ago it's been now, I've kind of grown to appreciate and like them or not all of them, but some of them I've grown to appreciate and like quite a bit more than I did when I did the initial reviews. So this time around with the Beach Boys albums, I'm wanting to have them and play them for a while and kind of get used to them, put them down for a while, come back to them before I'm doing the reviews so that I don't say this is the greatest album ever and then a month later I'm thinking what was I thinking, or this is garbage, and then get to like it later. But this album was described by some critics as sort of pretty but slight and inconsequential, which is a fair criticism, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. So the story is, of course, so far that they started off as this band that was singing just fun rock and roll pop songs about driving around looking for girls, going to the beach to go surfing, and riding around in your car and with your buddies and your friends. And Brian, of course, eventually got tired of that and wanted to expand. Even in their early days, there were signs of that with songs like Lonely Sea and Warmth of the Sun, Surfer Girl, and In My Room and all that. More sophistication than your typical pop group of the time writer. So then he got more and more ambitious, as did other contemporary bands, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, the Who, all of those other bands that were around the same time as Beach Boys, the Temptations, and so forth. And that kind of led to more ramped up, full-scale, big production projects, which, kind of saw its apex in, started off with Beach Boys Today, and then, of course, Pet Sounds and Smile, which didn't come off as planned. Since Smile didn't work out and left Brian in a fragile state, that led to the rest of the band getting more involved in the production of the albums post Smile and songwriting and so forth, and which not necessarily a bad thing either. But so yeah, when Smile didn't work out, they sort of salvaged what they could and then wrote some new songs and came up with Smiley Smile, which I reviewed here a few days ago. Very weird, strange album. One of probably the strangest, or one of the strangest of their careers. Strangest I've heard so far. So then 3 months later they come up with this, and I'm imagining that their popularity having sunk like a stone pretty much between 66 and 67 to where they're on top of the world, in 63, 4, 5, and 6, and all of a sudden nobody wants to know about them or cares about them, at least over in America, so much anymore. And I'm sure the band was pretty much at a loss what to do with Brian going through troubles, and they couldn't depend on him as much as they had in the past, and the rest of the band having to step up and not really selling albums like they used to and having the hits like they had just a year ago. And sure, they were wondering what to do, and seems to be that they just figured, what do we got to lose? Let's go in and just make an album of rock and roll pop songs, just have fun and make some songs. It doesn't have to be a grand, big production, doesn't have to be a rock opera or a theme running through it, or deep, profound statements. Let's just have fun and make a record. of songs, and which in its own way, and given that 1967 is the year of profound big production albums, you know, that whole 67, 66 through 69 really, of, you know, rock as art, as an important statement, as protest music, as reflecting the times and so forth. In its own way, this is kind of revolutionary, that when everybody's making, you know, uh, Sergeant Pepper's and Satanic Majesty's requests and Axis Bold as Love and all that, that here's one of the biggest or formerly biggest bands around, just let's just make an album of songs and have fun. And obviously the fact that this came out 3 months after the last album, they recorded it pretty quickly. So yeah. And I never can pronounce the guy's name, but I don't know if he's even still around, but he used to be a rock music critic for the Village Voice and for Cream magazine back in the day. Robert Christou, I guess that's how you say it. He calls this album so slight but perfect and full of pleasure, and that's about as best you can say it. I can't really think of a better way to sum it up. But this, and I always thought when I was a kid, I thought this was a painting that, or just a graphic, you know, pictorial representation. I don't know, but it's actually a stained glass window that's in was in Brian Wilson's house at the time when he lived in his house in Malibu or Hollywood, not Hollywood, Beverly Hills or Malibu. And what I read is that when they moved out of that house, his wife then, former wife now, had the window taken out of the house, and she took it to where her house is, wherever she lives now. So that's kind of real interesting, huh? Anyway, so there's that. There's the back cover. If I hadn't already shown that. It's I really like this album, and this was a lot of fun on this one. It's exactly why I started this series, like I said, to find out if there's more to the Beach Boys than just the radio hits, and if the albums are just filler, or if there's some stuff on, you know, worthwhile stuff on it. And putting this one on and listening to it, even from the get go, has just been a blast, and I've played it numerous times since. It is, you know, it's a very pretty album that, as far as profound statement or great art, doesn't really add up to much, but in its own way, I guess it does, because it's just such a breezy, fun joy of an album. And I would say, well, they made better albums, but from what I've heard, and there's a lot of their albums I haven't heard yet, but from what I've heard so far, this would probably come in as like my maybe third or fourth favorite album of theirs so far. There's more to come. We'll see. That might change. But yeah, so they just and the title is Brian Wilson owned a health food store for a time in the late 60s, and he was kind of on a eat healthy kick. You eat healthy but do a lot of drugs and lay in bed all day. I don't know how that exactly, but anyway, we'll move along. But so wild honey being a good dietary staple, and wild honey just being a cute girl who's a honey and wild, and you get the idea. Uh, anyway, so this was a 45. Wild Honey was. It didn't do that well. It only went to number 31 in the U.S. Didn't do that much better in England. It went to number 21 there. Carl sings. Carl Wilson, of course, and it's it's just a great. I love this song. I'm giving this song a 10. You know, Carl is known for everybody in the Beach Boys vocally is great. Even that idiot Mike Love, you got to give you due where it's due. But Carl's probably the best vocalist in the band, and you know, he's usually known for those very high angelic vocals, God only knows, and so forth. Here, he just sort of rips it, and it's sort of like Lennon's vocal in Twist and Shout or something, and the song just drives. It's got great percussion, of course. Carl's voice is great. You know, it's a little surprise to hear him singing that rough, but it's great. The organ, the theremin in there, which I've never been a big fan of the theremin. That's always been Good Vibrations was always noted for one of the first rock songs to use the theremin, and I always thought that just sounded goofy in there, which is one reason why that's a great song, but never been one of my favorite Beach Boys songs. It's also in a song or two on Pet Sounds. It works a little better there, but here the theremin actually works. Usually it's an instrument that I think should just be relegated to the soundtrack of old black and white Frankenstein and Dracula movies, creepy haunted house movies. But it's just not my favorite instrument, but it works really well here with the organ, just kind of a driving organ, percussion. Song's a 10. It's great. It's a shame that it wasn't a bigger hit. Shame it doesn't show up on the oldies radio stations really anymore. So we go to song number 2, which is called Aren't You Glad, which is shared vocals by Mike and Brian and Carl. Sounds kind of it's a smooth song that clips along at a mid-tempo pace, sort of like makes you feel like you're out for a walk on a nice spring day, not too hot, not too cool. It kind of sounds like the Loving Spoonful a little bit. Pretty great song. I give it a 9. One thing of note here is the trademark Beach Boys harmonies that are ever present up to this point. They're still here on this album, but there's a lot more just solo singing numbers where there's really not as much harmony or shared leads. There are some songs where they share off on leads, like one guy will sing and then the next guy will sing and then the next. But I mean, as far as the harmony together, it's here. It's just not as much as in the past. So it's a stripped down, and this is kind of known as their R&B soul influenced record, which is kind of funny, but it works. I mean, Carl and Dennis were big Chuck Berry and R&B and Motown fans. So, and Carl kind of took the lead on production on this album, really, even though Brian still has a hand in it. But so that's why you kind of get this is a lot of people call this the Beach Boys soul album, as funny as that sounds, but it is and it works. So, and in fact, number 3 song is "I Was Made to Love Her," which of course is Stevie Wonder song written by Stevie Wonder and a hit for Stevie Wonder. Went to number 2 in 1967, the Stevie Wonder version. Didn't get to number 1 because "Light My Fire" by the Doors stayed at number 1 for 4 weeks. A little bit of trivia there. So here you've got kind of the widest of white bread groups taking on Stevie Wonder and Motown. Obviously Carl sings. Again, obviously they don't equal or top Stevie Wonder as far as the song, but for that, and some people said this is kind of a wimpy version and all. It's pretty good. I think they do all right. They're not as good at doing this sort of thing as the Rolling Stones or the Beatles were, because the Beatles covered a lot of girl group and Motown stuff early on when they still did covers. But I think Carl's voice here, the song clips along pretty nice. He's got a suitably urgent and aching vocal, so you believe that he's actually singing to someone he loves, and they're having fun. They just do a run through it. It's not as good as Stevie Wonder's version, but it's pretty good overall. We go to number 4 song on side 1, which is called "Country Air." It's inconsequential song, but it's pretty. It sort of starts off sounding very almost classical and pastoral, but then it goes into just a mood of kind of walking around, and it's the group sings on it. Everyone sort of shares the vocals. What there is, there's not a whole lot to it. Kind of humming and whistling and walking around and looking at the woods and looking at nature and the clouds and just enjoying it. Sounds not unlike something that might fit in on Ram, the Paul McCartney album, actually. Be honest, it's a pretty song. It's nothing major to it, but I'm going to give it a 7. It's nice. I like it. Number 5 is a song called "A Thing or Two." Mike Love, Carl Wilson, and Brian Wilson share vocals on this. Uh, Again, it's a nice song. It's a little bit better than Country Air. It's got a nice guitar bit to it. Just nothing complex, but just a pretty just a nice guitar bit. And I give that song an 8. Side 2 is the one song that I knew, like I said, and the one that was the hit, Darling. Uh, was released as a 45. This went to number 19 in America, number 11 in the UK, so it did a little bit better there. Carl sings, again, you notice Carl sings quite a bit on this album on leads, and he's got a great voice, so why not? Anyway, the horns and the guitar, they all work together. It's a good pop song. I'm going to give it a 10. Shame it didn't do a little bit better in the U.S. You still hear this on oldies radio sometimes, not as much as, say, California Girls and God Only Knows, but it's a good song, and so I'll give it a 10. Mike and Brian wrote the song, and they actually wrote the song like 3 or 4 years earlier. The original title of the song was Thinking About You Baby, and they gave it to a girl named Sharon Marie, and she recorded it in 1964. I went on YouTube and I found some Sharon Marie songs, but I didn't find that one, so I'd like to hear it. I guess it had different lyrics, but musically kind of sounds the same. So I don't know, I would like to compare the two. I listened to a couple of the other Sharon Marie songs, and pretty good stuff if you like the old girl group stuff, which I love that stuff. But so she's pretty good. But anyway, so yeah, great song. What did I say? I gave that a 10. Um, okay, so now we go to the second song on side 2 called I'd Love Just Wants to See You. Brian sings lead here. This is this I'm going to give this a 9.5. This is great. And I think this, and I'm putting words in Brian Wilson's mouth, I don't know because I don't know him and wasn't there, of course, but to me, I'm thinking that this is kind of a little tongue-in-cheek joke on Brian's part, kind of maybe his comment on the whole Pet Sounds and Smile, because when you're listening to this song and the build-up and the lyrics, I, anyway, think that, he's making this sort of big picture statement on, everlasting or unrequited love sort of theme that fit right in with Pet Sounds. And then it turns out at the end, the line, and it's just a joke because he's just sees a girl and he's horny and wishes he could see her naked, which, fair enough. We've all been there. So I'm giving this song a 9. I think it's great. The music is really nice. It sounds a lot like the Velvet Underground, oddly enough. Just listen to the Velvet Underground's Loaded album and then listen to this. And maybe Lou Reed was a Beach Boys fan, being that this came out 3 years before Loaded. And sounds like some of the things off their third album, too, sort of the bop, bop, bop chorus and all. It even reminds me a little bit of the Jam in some parts musically. Slightly, but just a little bit it does. And of course, they didn't come along till 10 years later. But yeah, give that a 9. All right, so we move to song number 3. Side 2 is called Here Comes the Night. Brian sings again. I think this is the only 2 lead vocals that he has. Might be wrong. We'll find out in a second here. But yeah, this is a good R&B soul workout of a song. It's got a nice little bass line motif running through it. I like it. I'm going to give it a 10. The bad news, or I don't know, but on their 1979 album L.A., they redid this as an 11-minute disco song, which I haven't heard yet, but I guess I'm going to hear that in time as we get up to the later albums, because I'm doing these in order, you see. But I don't even have that album yet, so I've got an 11-minute Beach Boys disco song to look forward to. Oh boy. Anyway, but this version here, the original in '67, Here Comes the Night, it's a great little soulful driving song. It's a neat song. I'm going to give it a 10. So number 4 song on side 2 is called Let the Wind Blow. Again, we got Mike Love, Brian, and Carl sharing the leads. It is the only Beach Boys song to be in 3/4 time throughout, I read. not being musically inclined, I don't really know what that means. I know there's 4 beats to a measure, but um, I read that stuff every once in a while and don't have a clue what it means. But anyway, uh, this Pretty Thing is sort of a sounds not unlike some of the Pet Sounds material, even though it's significantly scaled back from those big production numbers. But it's nice, it's pretty. I'll give it an 8. Fifth song on side 2 is How She Boogalooed It. Carl singing again. So there's Carl again. It's really danceable, dance-friendly song. It's in fact, I was dancing here right before I made this video while I was listening to it. And it's just a party rock and roll, great guitar, the hand claps, and just kind of driving. He just starts off with the foot on the pedal at the beginning of the song and doesn't let up throughout. And the rough vocal of Carl is great. And I'm going to give that a 10. I like that. And the sixth and final song on side 2 and final song on the album is called Mama Says, which the group share vocals on. And this was a little section of the song Vegetables, which was intended for the Smile album that never came out until, well, it did eventually, but not then. And then also there was a different version of Vegetables on Smiley Smile, and this section was dropped from that. But it's a short song. It's only 1:05. And so that section was dropped from the released Vegetables until the Smile box set came out in 2012. Just a little snippet. It's a weird song. It's kind of a strange way to end the album. And this would actually have fit a lot better on Smiley Smile, that album being so goofy, cool, weird, and strange and experimental. This kind of psychedelic cover aside is really just a straightforward rock and soul and R&B fun song album. So there's really nothing, maybe a little hippy dippy somewhat, but I mean really just good old rock and roll, and there's nothing strange or experimental or too psychedelic about any of this. So Mama Says is kind of a odd man out song that would have been better on the album before, but as it is, it kind of works for closing the album. I'm going to give it a 6.5. It's like I said, 1:05, so it's here and gone before you know it. Just kind of a odd thing, strange way to end the album. I really have enjoyed this album, and this is a great. I'm going to give it overall a 9.25, and the only reason I was tempted to go a 10 on it, but 1967, was arguably the greatest year of music ever, or certainly up there. You've got Sgt. Pepper, you got Something Else by the Kinks, you got Sell Out by The Who, their best album, you've got Forever Changes by Love, a couple of Jimi Hendrix albums, Piper at the Gates of Dawn's, Between the Buttons by The Road, and I could go on and on and on. So this is not the equal of those, which all of those pretty much get a 10 or whatever, but this is a lot of fun, and like I said, it's kind of revolutionary in their own way. Not that anyone noticed or was paying attention at the time, because the Beach Boys had been pretty much forgotten, but I mean that in that self-important year, granted the music's great and all, but they were just having fun again. And yeah, so and in a way, the band, a lot of the band members didn't want, when Smile and Pet Sounds and stuff, depending on who you listen to, a lot of the band members wanted Brian, to just keep cranking out the hits like before and keep the hit machine going. This album kind of does that. It's just that by this time nobody cares anymore, so it didn't sell very well. But it's basically the pre-Pet Sounds Beach Boys, just sort of updated for the times, because I'm sure even Mike Love by this time realized that songs about driving to the hamburger stand with see if any chicks in bikinis were around was a little out of date for 1967. So, but it's basically those type of songs just updated a little bit. But it works. It's great. 9.25. And yeah, next one up is Friends. So we'll see you later.